Okay, I guess we're good to go, everybody. Good morning, or I guess good afternoon, and welcome to the Women at Work third conversation on the 2020 View on Women poll. It's a national attitudinal survey that explores implicit bias toward women. And it's presented in partnership with the College of St. Rose Women's Leadership Institute. And today's event is also sponsored by the Martin Group. And we are also supported by our Women at Work corporate partners that include Bank of America, the College of St. Rose, Godfrey Financial Associates, Community Loan Fund of the Capital Region, Brand 21, Frank Adams Jewelers, and our newest partner, Palette of Saratoga Springs, and soon with a location in Schenectady. And I just realized I didn't introduce myself. I'm Susan Mahalik. I'm the executive editor of Women at Work, and I'm also the managing editor of news with the Times Union. Today at our event, we are welcoming back Dr. Eve Walter, who is the creator of the View on Women poll, and she will be joined in conversation by Dorsey Apliers, who is the chief city auditor for the city of Albany. But first, why don't I introduce Eve, and we'll get going with her data. For those of you who haven't tuned in to our previous events or haven't been at our summits in the past, Dr. Walter is the director of Eden Research and Evaluation, and she is also an associate professor at Mount Sinai's Icahn School of Medicine, and she is as well serving in her first term on the Ulster County Legislature. She holds a PhD in epidemiology from the State University at Albany's Department of Epidemiology and Biostatistics, and her personal research agenda centers primarily on women's health and women's status in the United States and globally. Her publications include over 15 academic papers on women's issues, including domestic violence, contraception, and breastfeeding, as well as a documentary about women's sexual exploitation. In addition, Eve provides evaluation, research, and statistical consultancy for a number of community-based health and governmental agencies, and she is the principal researcher and creator of the Women at Work New York poll on View on Women poll in 2017, and then this year's national Women at Work View on Women poll. And today we're going to be talking about questions from the poll that relate to women in politics, which is a very ripe topic right now. So Eve, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. So as Susan mentioned, the National View on Women poll is a randomized web-based survey. We surveyed 3,500 adults ages 18 and over across the country. We ensured that there was representation by gender, race, and ethnicity. And when we compare our findings to the US Census, we find that we randomize very well. There's a margin of error of 2%, which this is a large survey, much larger than your typical poll. So it's a very robust tool for measuring social perceptions of women. Also, as Susan mentioned, this focuses on implicit bias. And so for those people who are less familiar with the idea of implicit bias, these are the biases that people hold inside themselves that they, one, may not know that they have, and two, the way they present themselves or their language may very much differ from the biases that they hold. So they may walk the walk, but they're not really feeling these feelings inside. And so we created this survey to really try to get to where people were actually at. Again, as Susan brought up, we look at implicit bias towards women in the workplace, in education, in families, in relationship, and in politics and policies. And so for today, we're focusing on this section of politics and policies. And so with that, we'll go to the first slide. So this is a more macro question, right? So we asked people if they felt that if there were more women elected to political office, would the United States be worse off, the same, or better off? So it's kind of a broader type of question. And so what you see from our results is that nearly half of the females in our country and about 1 in 3 males feel that the United States would be better off if we had more women in political office. To put this in context, right now, on a federal level, women represent about 24% of those who hold political office, and on a state level, about 29%. And so this question is, would having more women in these offices actually improve this political landscape? And, while one might think that this is not wholly promising, it's only half of females, only 1 in 3 males feel that we'd actually be better off if we had women in these political offices. I feel like I'm encouraged, at least by this first slide, because I think if we looked maybe 10 years ago, I think these numbers might be lower. This concept that having more representation, more diverse representation in the political world is a new one. So now let's just talk about the skill sets for these politicians. So we'll go to the next slide. So this question asks, who is better at standing up for what they believe in despite political pressure? No difference, men or women. And so what you can see is that a little over half of US adults feel that males and females would be equally as good in standing up for what they believe in despite political pressure. Then when you look, if there is a preference towards one gender or another, you could see that for females, they're more strongly leaning towards other females being better at standing up to political pressure, with 28% compared to 15%. It's almost double. And males, we kind of have the converse. We have that about 33% of them thinking males are better, with 14% feeling that females are better. Let's go to the next slide. And now there's another question we ask is, in high political office, who's better at working out compromises? Now it's slightly more than half are saying, well, there's no difference between men and women. And then when we look at our females, we find that a large proportion of them feel that women would be better, with only 11% arguing that men would be better at working out compromises. Males, they're kind of split between it, but interesting, women eke up just a slightly higher in being better at working out compromises. So it's interesting because if we go back now, let's think of the last 3 slides. So the first one says, would we be better off if we had more women in political office? And what we find is about half of women say yes, and about a quarter of men, or 1 in 3 men, say yes. So would we be better off? And then we ask more specific questions like, who's better at working out compromises? Who is better at standing up to political pressure? And so what's kind of interesting is, 70% or more feel that women are either as good or better at standing up to political pressure, and 80% or more are feeling like women are as good or better at working out compromises. But the question is, are these skill sets what we seek in our politicians? I mean, just because we feel that women are really good in these ways, and especially at working out compromises, is this something that we're valuing in our politicians? And so we'll go to the next slide. So another question we ask is, how important is it to increase the number of women in elected political office? And they had the opportunity to say from not at all important to somewhat important to extremely important. And this is the percentage of people who feel that it's extremely important. And so here we see this drop, right? So we have about a quarter of women and less than 1 in 5 males feeling that it's extremely important to increase the number of women in political office. So now let's contextualize it all. So we've got about half of the people thinking like we'd be better off if we have it. We have a lot of people who think that women have these certain skill sets that may or may not be important. But now this extremely important to increase the number. To me, this is like an action question, because this is, to choose to canvass for a politician, or to donate money for a politician, or to go out and vote for a politician, you have to feel that it's important to vote for them. And so this suggests that even if we might passively say, well, yeah, they have these skills and maybe we'd be better off, I'm not so sure if I think it's important that I go and I elect these women into office. So what else impacts this? And we'll go to the next slide. So this question is a social norming question. So I kind of lied in the beginning. I said these are all implicit bias questions. This is not implicit bias. This is about social norming. And so this question has the statement, there are very few women in American politics because voters are opposed to female politicians. And it purposely uses this word opposed to, it tries to, have this strong, clear language. I don't want ambiguity here. And these are the percent who agree. And so here we have among females, over half of them feeling that other people oppose female politicians, and males, again, about half of them. And so what's really interesting about this is, you make this decision about who you should support, but if you think that other people aren't going to support this person, then that's going to impede you. And I remember myself when it came to having this, in many situations, you find this stream of politicians, and if there's a politician who you say, well, I really like that person, but I don't think anyone else is going to vote for him, or not enough people will, it's harder to get behind them. And so when women are walking around, seeking out these political offices where their constituents are thinking, well, other people probably don't want them there, at least half of them, then this creates a huge barrier. And so then the question is, where does this leave us? Now I want to look at policy, because politicians do need to talk about policies for women. And so we'll explore some questions that give us an idea of what should be argued when getting on that bully pulpit, what policies might be important in terms of women. So we'll go to the next slide. So this was percent who feel that equal pay for equal work. How important is it? And we had an option of extremely important, somewhat important, and not too important. And so to me, this was like an easy one, right? I mean, we've been talking about equal pay for equal work forever, and it almost seems like, well, who could possibly disagree that that's important, right? That seems like an easy give, right? And yet here we have 40% of females and 40% of males and a quarter of females saying this is not too important. Obviously, we have that what the gender difference where more males are feeling this is not too important than females, but still, in many of my questions, there's this right answer. And to me, the right answer is 0% should say it's not too important. And here we have far from 0% saying that that's not too important. We'll move to the next slide, please. And so another question asks the importance of reducing discrimination against women of color. And again, we have over 40% of men and over 1/4 of females who feel like this is not too important. And what's interesting is this survey was done before the extensive Black Lives Matter protests that we've been seeing. It happened just before that. And it's kind of interesting because it would be interesting to see whether a question like this could have been changed by that environmental factor. Because in the last 3 years, we've had a pretty, or at least, in the last 3 years, we've had a pretty robust Me Too movement that came out of the election of Trump. And if we go to the next slide, when we ask how many feel it's important to reduce domestic violence and sexual assault, almost everyone thinks that this is important. So very few people are willing to say that this is not too important. And so it's kind of interesting because to me, I don't believe that if we went back 4 years ago, this would have probably looked a lot like the other two questions where these policies are not too important. But I think that enough of the attention in the Me Too movement, when this survey was done, which was back in the beginning of this year, beginning of 2020, in people's minds that this was an important issue. And this policy is actually an easier policy for women to talk about than for men. And so I guess if women who are running for government for political position, this probably would be a wise thing for them to talk about, because this is something that's viewed as an important, or at least somewhat important, issue. And that's the last of my slides.
I guess we're back to me now, and joining us in conversation will be the Honorable Dr. Dorsey Aplears, who has built a personal and professional life in the city of Albany, devoted to improving the quality of life for residents, and she currently serves as Albany's Chief City Auditor. She was appointed by Mayor Kathy Sheehan at the beginning of this year, and prior to that appointment, she served on the Albany Common Council representing the city's first ward. She was first elected in 2014 and then re-elected in 2018. During her second term, she served as chair of the Public Safety Committee. And Dorsey moved to Albany in 2003 to pursue a graduate level education, and since has earned a master's degree and doctorate in public health from the University at Albany School of Public Health. She is very involved with her alma mater, and she serves as a clinical associate professor in health policy management and in the health policy management and behavior department, and is a member of the Dean's Advisory Council and Community Advisory Council. And she also serves as the subject matter expert for the school's Center for Public Health and Continuing Education. And in her spare time, she is also very engaged with the community, and she serves as the vice president for community health initiatives with the Community Foundation for the Greater Capital Region. And she is also a board member of Eleanor's Legacy, the regional food bank of Northeastern New York, the Center for Women in Government and Civil Society, and the Capital District New Leaders Council. And she is a member of the Albany County Board of Health. She resides in Albany with her loving and very supportive husband, Don Lee, and their beautiful daughter, Noble. So welcome, Dorsey, to the conversation. I know this is going to be a good one. We've got two women who are politicians and are also very accomplished in their fields. And the first question I'm going to start with is, what made you decide to seek political office in the first place? And we'll ask that to Dorsey so we can get her voice into this conversation.
Hi, and thank you so much, Susan. So point of clarity, I need to update that bio. I've since transitioned from the Community Foundation in the role of Vice President for Community Health Initiatives, but I will still be serving on the board for the Community Foundation. So just wanted to clarify that.
Thank you.
So this decision to run for office, there were so many factors that went into making the decision. First, like most women, the ask. There was a woman in my community, a mentor, who has been very invested in my political career, Judith Maza, who I'm sure is tuning in right now, was the woman who saw me in the community, sparked a conversation with me, and had the audacity to ask me to run for office. So the ask happened, but also this notion of empowerment through the Center for Women in Government and Civil Society. I was a fellow going through the fellowship, and it was there that I was exposed to all of these she-roles that I now have an opportunity to serve with, like Mayor Kathy Sheehan and Assemblywoman Pat Fahey. I was a student, and these women were coming and talking to my cohort about what it means to run for office, what it means to make a difference. And I went from thinking, oh, politics is not for me, or not even thinking about it, to seeing them, and also in Carolyn McLaughlin, who was the former council president, seeing these women and thinking, if they're doing it, then maybe this is something that I can do too. The other factor that played into my decision was the motivation from my family and friends. It was my husband saying, Dorsey, you can do this. My mother, my grandmother, people who I know and trust saying, you have what it takes to do this. And lastly, this desire to want to make a difference. I have a good friend of mine who said, Dorsey, think about all of the young women, in particular, young women of color, who will see you and think, if she is doing it, I can do it too. And it really was one of the toughest decisions that I've ever had to make. And so much went into that decision, but those are some factors that stand out for me.
Thanks, Dorsey. And Eve, how about you? What got you thinking, I'm going to do this?
It's funny. I feel like my story is almost the opposite. So for me, I had done a lot of community work, and I had found myself sort of in front of legislature, arguing or advocating and doing other kinds of things. And I always felt, and I guess this is where we agree, I always felt like I could do that, but it was it was almost a negative. It wasn't women who were inspiring me. It was people who I felt weren't as smart as I was. And then I thought, if they can do it, I could do it. You often think that a politician is born as this special creature, and it's not who you are, but they're just everyday people. And it allowed me to see that it's everyday people. But I never felt it was my turn. Because there were other people in office, and I always felt like, well, everybody's pretty happy with that person, and so I should just wait my turn. And so it was an interesting thing, especially in local politics, where people stay in the same position for so long, you feel like it's never your turn. And really what happened is, at one point, someone did say to me, hey, you might want to consider running for county legislator. And I said, well, it's not my turn. I didn't use that word, but I said, there's somebody already there, and doesn't everybody feel good about that person? And this person said, well, maybe you should ask around. And I identified that that person wasn't as popular and well-liked and appreciated. And I guess I used that to push me to say, you know what, I can run against this person, but it was very intimidating to do. I didn't have the support. I didn't have people who were openly coming behind me and saying, I've got you on this. I felt, besides my partner, I felt very alone in it in many ways, because people felt very uncomfortable about supporting me if there's this other person running. And so it was a challenging thing, but it was this idea of saying, I can't just always wait for my turn to happen. I have to take it.
You have to take the opportunity when it presents itself. So, we hear that women tend to stay out of politics because it's hard. It's hard to break into. And what has been the most difficult aspect of running for office for both of you? I guess, Dorsey, we can toss it back to you.
Sure. The most difficult aspect of running. First, it's the fear factor, and the self-doubt. And I have to be very honest to say that I really did not think I had what it took to be an elected official. And because I had in my mind what the model politician looked like, and that person didn't look like me. And so the self-doubt was a barrier. Also, the fear of, you hear that politics are dirty, and it's a contact sport. Your life is out for public display, and I am a very private person, and so just the thought of aspects of my life being open to the public was very intimidating. The other thing is this fear. I had a very clear picture of what I wanted to do with my life and where I saw myself. And it was getting my doctorate in public health. And I must say that while I was considering running, I was in the throes of my dissertation. So 4 years into a doctoral program, I'm at the tail end. This dissertation is driving me crazy. I can't wait to get out. And so this whole notion of running for office was thrown in the mix. And I'm thinking, the timing, how can I complete this doctorate and run for office at the same time? And then on top of it is this notion from a poem that I really enjoy from Marianne Williamson. Our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate, it is that we are powerful beyond measure. I think as I reflect on it, I had envisioned what I wanted for my life. And a part of me thought, what if I get into this and I really like it? Is this going to take me away from my true path? And so all of those played into, this creating a huge wall. The other is campaigning is brutal. For anyone who has had to campaign as a candidate, it is taxing physically, it's taxing mentally. And as Eve talked about, you have people around you, but you feel very isolated, very alone. And so campaigning was tough for me. It consumes you. If you're in it and you're out there, it requires you to show up in ways that you've never shown up before. And that's my own personal experience. So that process of just being out there every day, talking to people, being critiqued every day was very challenging.
And Eve, what do you have to add to that? What has been your biggest challenge in running? What have been the hard parts there?
So yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I guess I didn't realize that we both have a PhD from University of Albany in School of Public Health. So I love that. And it's interesting because I'm at a later part of my career. So I was in academia for 20 years, and I had done a lot of that stuff. And so I'm kind of at this place where I'm not building a new career or even in the middle of a career. I'm kind of, this sort of felt like an easier time for me because what I wanted to achieve, I feel like I mostly have. That said, everything else totally the same. I mean, it's not just that you have to be out there all the time, but you have to basically be like, I'm great. Look how great I am. Look, hey, everybody, I'm so terrific. And, that's just not something that normal people, we were taught as children not to do that, and you have to. And so I think that's challenging. And I guess the last is repeat what I said is that support system, and I think we'll probably talk about this maybe a little bit later, but you're taking a huge risk when you run. And if you don't have people saying, you've got this, you're great, and you should, keep going, I could see how it could be very easily discouraging. Because it is, you're really putting yourself out there. It's really quite a risk.
Definitely. And I just would like to interject here. If anybody has questions for Dorsey or Eve, please text them in on Facebook and we will answer your questions. My next question, has to do with the challenges of actually serving. Once you've gotten elected, what are some of the biggest issues that you face? Is there still an old boys network that you need to break through? And I think, Dorsey, you had mentioned there had been some tendencies on the Albany Common Council for people to sort of make their deals, behind the scenes. Can you speak to that, what your experience is with that, Dorsey?
Absolutely. So the experience that I was sharing was there was an opportunity that opened up for me to take on a leadership role on the council. And I felt that I had put the work in. I felt that I was qualified to serve in a leadership capacity. I had worked hard. And when I started to talk to colleagues, which is what you do, you start the conversations. I spoke to one of my male colleagues who I have a great deal of respect for. And what he shared with me was that he had already had conversations with many of the male colleagues on the council, and they wanted him to pursue the leadership position, and that they felt that he was the best person for the job. And, the takeaway from that experience for me was that when I look at the patterns of men, whether it's in this setting or other settings, innately they came together and put forth the person that they wanted to see in that position. And as a woman, I found myself calling my female colleagues, and some of them also were interested. And so we didn't think to galvanize and come together to say we're going to pick one and put that person forward. And I don't know if that's the naivete when it comes to politics. I don't quite fully understand yet what that was all about. But it was definitely a lesson learned for me. And I ended up backing out of the opportunity because I felt in that moment, if colleagues had already identified who they wanted for that role, then it wasn't worth me pursuing. I will never do that again. But it was a good lesson learned for me.
A lesson learned that you need to, put yourself out there even when you're fighting against the tide, or?
Absolutely. And it's what Eve shared, this notion of wait your turn. When I probed to find out, well, why not me? And so I heard comments like, well, you don't have the time, you're busy. You wouldn't be able to show up for leadership meetings. So it was interesting that there were colleagues who were telling me about my schedule and what I was too busy for. The other thing is, and I saw this with my dear friend and colleague, Congresswoman Presley, and having a conversation with her when she was gearing up to run for Congress. And I remember several years ago meeting with her, and she said, I think I'm going to run for Congress. And she talked about all the reasons why her colleagues told her it was not a good idea. She was a freshman. She needed to wait her turn. She would never win. And what I learned, as Congresswoman Presley has learned, what Eve mentioned she has learned, is that if you wait, it will never be your turn. And so you just have to put yourself out there, and you'll be surprised at how many times women come out on top when they just put themselves out there.
And you guys are great examples of that. And Eve, how about you? Since, I realize you're, still pretty new to political office, but what are some of the things that, some of the challenges that you've faced that maybe, you wouldn't have anticipated?
Well, I guess there's the question of whether I didn't anticipate them or not. There was an interesting situation that recently happened where it was a vote to make a decision on an appointment, and it was a woman probably in a position, in a role that's traditionally held by males. And I was opposed to this person because I felt that she did not have all of the qualifications necessary. It's an interesting dichotomy because I definitely make this argument plenty of times in my life that, what it takes to build up the skill sets is often limited for women, for people of color. And so we can't assume it's a balanced playing field. But this was a particular case where I truly felt like it was not about gender barriers. This just wasn't the path that this person took that would give them the qualifications. And it was an important job that I felt those were missing. I was accused by several women in my community of being anti-feminist, anti-woman, because I was against this individual, and I was accused of being taken in by the boys' club. And I don't know, and kind of threatened in that way. It was a really horrifying experience because I see myself as being, a strong advocate for women. And sometimes a woman might not be the right person for a job. And, but to be accused of being one of the boys' clubs, to being accused of being manipulated by the men, and the people who were accusing me of being manipulated by men didn't recognize how sexist that was. Like, that was more sexist to suggest that I don't have a mind of my own, than to ask me really why it is that I felt that this person wasn't the right person for the job. And it was a very difficult experience.
Oh, I bet. One of the things that we spoke about in an interview before this event is that there's a lot of pressure when you're in office to go along with, what the group is interested in. And I think this dovetails with the View on Women poll, in that, are women more likely to bend to pressure? Is there a lot of pressure to sort of go along with the pack? Is it hard to break out on your own and have your own voice? Whichever one of you wants to jump in on that.
If I can jump on in here, and I would say yes. There is no blueprint. There is no manual for being an elected official, and that's also a barrier. You literally are driving the car and building it at the same time. You are trying to figure it out the best way you can and navigate some of the toughest terrain. So, given that, I know for me, I would say that I have a pleasant demeanor. I enjoy getting along with people. I enjoy working with people. And I thought, how naive of me, that just being nice, just being collegial was a way to connect with colleagues. And I learned early on that that's not what this is about. And, sometimes political issues trump relation, and please forgive me for using the word Trump, but I learned that sometimes people take politics so personal that it no longer is about the issue, it's about the person, and people get very nasty. And so I had to decide early on that I am not here to make friends. I am not here to go along to get along. And it's easy to conform to that, like any other collegial group. We talk about police officers right now, and well, how can officers stand by and watch another officer hold his knee on a man's neck? How can that happen? And it's, when you think about the camaraderie that's formed with colleagues, sometimes you lose sight of what you're there to do. And in this case, I had to make a choice that I'm here to serve the people. I'm here to serve the people who put me in office. I'm not here to be BFFs with colleagues. If I make a good friend along the way, great. If not, so be it. But that pressure is there.
And Eve, have you found that exists for you, or?
Yeah, I mean, there's two aspects. I mean, one part of is when, especially if it's your own caucus, it's sort of like, here's what we feel like. And you often feel like, well, wait a minute, I need to take time. I need to understand this a little bit better. And I'm not necessarily comfortable just agreeing or disagreeing until I know. But I think it's interesting because in the survey, it says, is more likely to stand up to political pressure, or is less likely to stand up to political pressure. The opposite side of that coin is are you the type of politician who it's my way or the highway? And and I think that there are, I do experience that, and it's probably more likely of male political colleagues who will take that attitude. So I guess you would say they do stand up for political pressure because they're the ones who start it. They're the ones who are like, this is the way it should be. And you find yourself sort of feeling very uncomfortable about how to maneuver it, because you do want to be collegial, but you also do need to, you were elected personally to speak for your constituents and not necessarily go along with the crowd. And I have voted differently from my colleagues occasionally, and it's not easy, but luckily there's so many more. We immediately move on to something else that, it's not necessarily doesn't linger too long.
Yeah, I guess that's a good segue for my next question is, in your experience, do you think that women govern differently than men? And maybe Dorsey, you've got a smile on your face. You want to take that one?
Yes, yes and yes and yes. We do. And that's just how it is. I don't want to make statements in which I'm generalizing, but understand that all women don't fall into these categories. But I look at my daughter, and already she has a very nurturing spirit. She has her baby dolls and her stuffed animals, and she's patting them on their back and putting them to sleep. And I watch her, and this notion that women are innately, not all women, but innately there's this level of nurturing. That I think serves us well, not even I think, I know serves us well as elected officials, because it's this notion that I am here to show up and take care of my community, take up for people, take care of. And personally, when I approach the work that I do, it is me showing up, not just for myself. Look at me, I'm here, I've arrived. I am here to serve. I am here to take care of my community. We are conditioned and normed early as girls and women to take care of other people's needs first. And yes, we need to shift that, because oftentimes we take care of everybody else's needs at our expense. So it's a balancing act that we must incorporate into our lives, but we tend to show up and take care of, whether it's an issue, whether it's a person, whether it's a community. That's what we do as women. Also, this idea of doing it for a cause. It's not about ego. It's about, how can I leave this world better than how I found it? And I find more often when I'm talking to my colleagues, in particular female colleagues, they got into politics because of an issue, because of something that they saw that they felt needed to be changed, versus I'm doing this because I want to ascend to be, this particular elected official, have this title. And then 2 examples, and then I'll let Eve jump in here. Going back to this notion of women being nurturers and having compassion, because I think that's what we've been missing in politics. We've been missing that we are really here to improve the quality of life for the people that we serve. It is really about the people. And if you don't have the compassion, if you don't like people, how are you in politics? Well, I was watching a documentary on the Freedom Riders, and they talked about when they would be in the deep Jim Crow South. And there were times they would be driving all night, and they couldn't stop at hotels because Black people couldn't check into a hotel. And what was interesting was that one of the Freedom Riders, who was alive to talk about the experience, he said they all had the mindset that they would, if they got too tired, they would stop at a house, stranger's house, and their prayer was that the missus of the house would open the door, because they felt that they would get a fair chance of being welcomed in for shelter or being able to sleep in someone's backyard if the woman answered the door versus the man of the house. And as segregated as the South was at that time, it still shows that women had enough compassion to let those freedom riders in. And there are so many other unique qualities that make us great legislators and leaders. But I felt it was important to focus on that, because we need so much compassion, so much healing in the moment that we're in now.
Thank you,
I would
Dorothy.
add to it that, I think perhaps because women, we've as girls and women, we go through our lives with these subtle implicit messages that we are less, we're not as good, we're not as smart, we're less. And so as a result, I think we tend to be more willing to take risks. We're more willing to fail, because it's sort of like, if you were born into the world already a failure, what do you got to lose? Not saying fully a failure, but it gives us the ability to take more risks. And I find it's interesting. So on my legislature, only 8 of the 23 legislators are women. And on both sides of the aisle, I'd have to say that proportionately, it's the women who have something to say, who will speak up, who will take that risk more proportionately than the men. I mean, I think whether I agree with them or not, the women are just, if they're there, they're going to more often than not, say what they have to say, even if it gets crickets in the room. And I think that it feels to me like many of the men, larger proportion of the men, are much more quiet. And, it's interesting, you get this like body of legislators where some of them just don't seem to talk at all. And they just sit there and they, they'll do their vote, but you don't really hear anything from them. That's more often the men. The women are more often just willing to say something out loud.
And how about consent? Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead, Dorsey.
Susan, I would be remiss if I didn't talk about how women have invented this notion of multitasking. We are the inventors of multitasking. And I shared with you and Eve, as a new mother, I would be on a conference call. So I was a stay-at-home mom, working mom. I'm on a conference call. I have a phone on in one hand, baby on the hip, pumping milk. Women do this every day. Multitask, take care of children, take care of their parents, work. And so, when you think about the dynamics of what it takes to be an elected official, we need people who know how to multitask, and women invented that concept, in my personal opinion.
Now we have a question from Rebecca. And it is, do you think that women are afraid to run for office because they feel it's a boys' club? And I think that sort of dovetails with a question that we were talking about ahead of time about the obstacles that women face, about being afraid to get in there because they see what goes on and it can be vicious. And we'll follow that with a question about bullying of candidates. But do you think that that's the thing that keeps women out of it, is they just don't want to, go up against the guys?
I mean, it's probably dependent on the situation, but I do think, and I think that Darcy really hit on this, is this idea that for so many years, what the picture of what a politician looked like is a white man. And it just it was not a world that sort of seemed to welcome people of color, women. And so it's sort of like, do I see myself in that role? How do I, if I don't see other people who are similar to me? And so I think that that's a big thing. And I do think there is that, that competitiveness. And I don't know if, women prefer, some women probably really are excited about competitiveness. Maybe others are not. I was told specifically when I was running against a male, like, just so you know, he will play dirty. He will do whatever he wants. You just better watch it. And, I was like, okay, I could do this, but I was, it's very intimidating. And I could imagine someone else being really pushed away. But I do think a big part of it is that politicians don't look like, they look like white men.
Mm-hmm. And in many cases, they do. When you walk into a room, that's what you may be met with. And I recall early on being invited to, and sometimes not even invited, I was told, you need to show up. You need to be here. You need to get your face out there. And I had to give myself plenty of pep talks in the bathroom. Plenty of pep talks to say, Dorsey, pull it together. Put your big girl panties on. Go in there and handle it. I am 5'1", so short stature. And I remember going, one of my first meetings, I was networking and putting myself out there. And I was talking to a male colleague of mine who, of course, was taller, a lot taller than I. And I'm talking to him. And another colleague, a gentleman that I didn't know that well, walked over, completely took control of the conversation. They were at eye level talking to each other as if I wasn't even in the room. I mean, and I had been there talking. And I remember feeling 3 feet tall. And I had pumps on that day. I intentionally put my pumps on to give me a few extra inches. And again, every experience for me is a learning experience. And I had to take from that and figure out how best to assert myself, because if you're not careful, there are times when your male colleagues will, not even just personality wise, but stature wise, will, throw themselves, I don't say at you, but you have to figure out how to assert yourself in the way that you get the respect that you deserve, and that you are heard in the way that you need to be listened to. And I can see why some women would walk into a room and see very few women, or be the only one, and say, you know what, how many times can I do this? It's uncomfortable. Even you talk about the gentleman's club, the culture. Oh, we're going to go for a beer and talk about, we're going to go for a beer later and have a conversation. I don't drink beer. We're going to go sit at the bar and drink. We're going to go smoke some cigars. We're going to go play golf. These norms that have been set up, the culture of how decisions are made before we even get to the meeting, if you don't partake in those, and there were times I had to go home and make dinner. I had to go home and take care of my home. I couldn't be out going to the bar for a drink. So for women, it's, how do I assert myself? How do I still get things done, but not conform to norms that just aren't comfortable for me? And that's a constant balancing act, I find, for myself, and I'm sure for other women.
Now, I'm noticing that we have just under 10 minutes left, and we have a few more questions that I think are important. The first is it difficult? Is it harder to convince men or women to support women candidates? What has been your experience? And I think, Dorsey, you had an interesting story to tell about when you were campaigning for now Mayor Kathy Sheehan of Albany. That if you would share that with our audience, I think it's interesting.
Yes, and I'll try to be as brief so we can get through as many of the questions. But as much as we think that it's men, there are oftentimes women, and I think internalized sexism has a lot to do with this. I'm on the campaign trail. I'm out campaigning for myself, and at the time, I was also Kathy Sheehan was campaigning for mayor, and I was talking to this woman about my candidacy, and I also was talking to her about Kathy running, and she looked me dead in my face and she said, "I will support you every day for common council, but I will not support Kathy for mayor, because that is a man's job, and I don't think a woman has the guts. She doesn't have what it takes to be a mayor. So I'm sorry, can't support her." And I was shocked. I was blown away. I really had to regroup in that moment.
So women can be very critical and also not supportive of other women. That brings us to another question. I think this notion of bullying, and I'm going to sort of roll this together with a discussion about the announcement that Kamala Harris is going to be the vice presidential running mate of Joe Biden on the Democratic ticket. And Dorsey, you mentioned that bullying is a real thing. You're bullied by constituents, you're bullied by colleagues. How do you deal with that? We're seeing on a national stage a woman who's unbelievably accomplished, and people are, picking her apart at every turn. It's like she's not, she's not Black enough. She's not Indian enough. She's been too tough on crime when she was a prosecutor. They're like, finding anything they can to throw mud at her. So how do you stand up to the bullying? And how do we also return our society to being more civil?
Mm-hmm. Few things. One, I think sometimes it's innate. Kamala Harris, she's known for being tough. And I think that just based on some of the storytelling that she's done, it started in her upbringing. Her parents prepared her for this. So as much as people want to bully her, she's a tough cookie. And I would say the same. I grew up in a very female dominant household, and we were raised, in the words of my grandmother from the South, not to take mess off of nobody. That's how I was raised. You straighten your back so that people don't feel comfortable standing on your back. And I think a lot of that had to do with, one, just being a woman, but also being a Black woman. This notion that, nobody's coming to save you. You're going to have to figure this out. You're going to have to figure life out, and you're going to have to learn how to fight to survive. And so innately, I don't do well with bullies because I am not intimidated easily. The other thing is, and I know that that's not every woman's story, but that's why the support system is so important, that your corner, because this world, your constituents, your colleagues, they will beat you up. This is a contact sport. And so having a corner where you can go into that corner and they're putting Vaseline on your face and they are giving you water, reviving you, helping you to get back in there to go another round, that support system is so important to help you build your self-efficacy, to develop that tough skin so that you can keep going out there every round to fight. And I see that happening, as you pointed out, nationally with Kamala. So she has a strong support system in addition to how she was raised, but a strong support system that is helping to shield her, but also nourish her so that she can keep going, because this is just the beginning. The attacks will continue.
I would say that I am not good with bullies, and next time I have a bully, I'm calling Dorsey to
I'm
help.
coming.
But I think when I think of Kamala, first of all, we have that argument: the more critiques you have about a person, the more potentially threatening they are. And so obviously, and this ties back to what we're talking about before, she basically represents everything that the current history of US vice presidents are not. She is everything they have not been, and including president. And I think it's really, I think it's good that they pick someone who's going to be able to be strong, because she will be attacked repeatedly. I personally, I was a little saddened because I was a big Stacey Abrams fan. I had this moment though this morning that I thought, well, what if next then Kamala will be president and she'll make Stacey Abrams vice president? And if we have two women of color as our president and vice president, can you imagine, we could possibly start undoing hundreds of years of the history that we've created? And so, but yeah, obviously these critiques are because she's threatening. She's very, very threatening. And that's a good thing.
So ladies, we are getting close to the end, and we do have a question from one of our viewers about who are the people that inspire you or that you look up to in today's world. I think that's a good place to maybe wrap up.
Right now, Dorsey.
Yeah, Dorsey's been doing the Democratic convention. She's here and she's got a baby. So
thank you. And I'm inspired by you, Eve, as well. I would say, and normally I would answer this question simply with saying my mom. And my mom passed away last year, and she still inspires me. She still motivates me. But a living being, I would say my daughter, Noble. She is already just a little feisty, very assertive girl. And she inspires me every day to want to make this world better, to be the best mother I can be, to be the best person I can be. And so it's all about Noble right now.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I'd say in addition to Dorsey, and there's many women out there who are doing this political thing and doing it well, and that I always find inspiring. I will add in there that, for me, my grandmother basically sent me a message my entire life. Two messages. One is be involved and be the change. And then the other one is, speak your mind. And that has motivated and guided me throughout my entire life. But I will reiterate that whenever I do see some incredible woman politician or leader in any way, I'm in awe of them, because, you know, I understand all. I've never walked fully in anyone else's shoes but my own, but I have a sense of where their shoes went, and I get how challenging it was to get to where they are. And they're I find them all very inspirational.
All right, well, ladies, thank you. We're hitting at 1 o'clock right now, and I know that you both have busy schedules. So Dorsey, Apliers, Eve, Walter, thank you so much for being here and sharing your experiences with our Women at Work community. And I'd also like to thank the College of St. Rose's Women's Leadership Institute, the Martin Group, and our corporate sponsors. And we would also invite the folks watching to join us again on September 9th, when we'll be back with a Women at Work breakfast featuring the sisters, Susan Ungerman and Michelle Ungerman Sanders. Some of you may know them because they run Seven Blessings Jewelry, and they have for a long time. But Susan is also the president of Ungerman Electric, and Michelle is also a massage therapist. So they'll have lots to talk about, and we look forward to seeing you then. But again, Dorsey and Eve, thank you so much. And good luck with the rest of the convention. That's got to be kind of crazy.
Thank
doing
you.
it remotely.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thanks to all our viewers for joining us. Take care, everybody.
Take care.